You're a good last Kim Corley. As time is short, I'll raise an issue that hasn't yet been raised by any of my colleagues across the chamber. On June 30th, the Arts Council advertised a tender for badly needed communications advice. Many of the major agencies in the country applied in good faith. The tender said that the agency would commence work in August 2020. Even though the assessment and the evaluations must have taken place, last week the Arts Council sent out a notice to say they had terminated the competition without the awarding of a contract. It gave a very strange reason, which I and many others would be curious to understand in more detail, that it was setting up a new comms group to produce a strategy for the Arts Council. This is curious because the very first paragraph of the tender as it was initiated said, and I quote, "Advise on and assist with development and implementation of the Arts Council's public relations, public affairs and media relations strategies, particularly in the context of the Arts Council's 10-year strategy, design work plans for these activities, including the identification of stakeholders and pathways to interact with them, and with the assistance of the Arts Council, review annually the delivery of the communications plan and devise recommendations for improvement." Minister, for reasons that I shall outline further as my contribution develops, I believe the Arts Council have acted in bad faith here to such an extent that an independent investigation is warranted into the issue. The inquiry should look for all the papers and records on it, and if that doesn't happen, the Arts Council will be inundated with freedom of information requests in relation to this matter. Agencies will have put major effort into the very demanding tender. It will have cost them well into the tens of thousands by the time that the tender came around in terms of commitments of staff and productions. These agencies are all in the creative industry in these troubled times. The last one you would expect to mess small businesses around is the Arts Council that deals with creatives, artists and small groups. Doing this now, after 4 months since the tender was advertised, is highly unprofessional and brings into question the board and the executive of the Arts Council. It shows a disrespect to people who spent time on a very demanding tender, and as a minimum they should be compensated for the time spent on this tender, which proved to not be the case. But it raises the need for the matter to be investigated by somebody independent. What went on in the Arts Council about this? What happened since the tender was advertised in June? What happened to the submissions made by the agencies who tendered? Were they assessed? Who assessed them? Was there an independent person or persons on the assessment? What have they to say about this? What did the assessments find? Why are the agencies only being told now? Will the Council use the agency's ideas? Is this just a free way to get others' intellectual property and ideas? Is this a proper way to do business? What was the Arts Council's true reason for this? Has there been any potential conflict of interest in the board or on the executive, or did somebody not like the assessment? There are a multitude of questions that need answers, which is why I believe the matter warrants an independent inquiry. If the Office of the Controller and the Auditor General was examining this issue, his approach would be very technical. Did the Arts Council abide by the guidelines, etc.? That's the approach that's needed in this inquiry. The Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform needs to be asked his view too. A chartered accountant himself, he might not be too happy to hear that decisions taken by the Arts Council to enact and then 4 months later to withdraw a public tender are adding to the very serious pressure already being faced by small businesses. And he might feel that he had to do something to investigate something that appears so incredibly unprofessional that it warrants further investigation. The excuse given from the Arts Council for withdrawing the tender raises more questions, as the first mention in the tender is of the comms strategy. So that is not something new, which has just happened. To the bemusement and the frustration of those creative agencies who went to the great efforts to put together a tender, the excuse given from the Arts Council as to why the tender was withdrawn seems to be quite identical as to why it was initiated in the first instance. For tenders, the only grounds for cancellation are exceptional circumstances. This hardly qualifies as such. The Arts Council is tone deaf to artists and agencies. It should not be allowed to do what has done to artists and now to agencies and to get away with it. Some local authorities have come under criticism recently for cancelling tender process without good reason, and this too needs to be examined. It underscores that the last thing one would expect from the Arts Council would be to be messing around with creative, Indigenous Irish small businesses at this incredibly precarious time. It is interesting to note too that the 3 reasons given by the Office for Government Procurement for state agencies cancelling a tender do not include the fig leaf cover as presented by the Arts Council last week. Your man, last Ken Corley.